Meg. Welcome to
Hi.
Cleaning.
I'm happy to be here. This is
I'm so happy
exciting.
to join me. Yes, thank you. So tell me about yourself and tell me a little bit about, maybe tell me about Nerdologics first on Fred
Mhm.
Hampton Leftist, and then tell me about your upcoming podcast.
Yeah, so Nerdologics is where nerd culture meets politics. We talk about the politics of different aspects of nerd culture. We just finished our road to Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We watched all the Captain America films, like basically any movie that Captain America was in. That way we could basically see the progression of what led him to choose Sam Wilson to be the next Captain America, and basically the legacy that he was picking up, but also what traits led to Steve picking Sam. And then that led us into talking about Falcon the Winter Soldier and basically picking up those threads of understanding, okay, this is why he chose Sam. So that was one of the things we did. We've also talked about Star Wars. We had Ryan Knight on to talk about Star Wars with us, and you can check out that episode soon.
Oh, I'm
We
definitely check that out.
we
That's
talked
awesome.
about Avatar: The Last Airbender. Today we talked about Loki in the Bad
Avatar.
Batch.
I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, so basically we talk about politics within the realm of anything nerd culture. Like we're gonna be talking about other things coming up. It's gonna be really exciting. I know we're gonna have you on soon to talk about the Hunger Games.
Yes, I am so excited to talk about. I actually have stuff to say about the Hunger Games. Like, I'm ready for
Yeah,
this. Ready.
yeah. There was a marathon on over the weekend,
Really?
so I just rewatched all the Hunger Games movies. So
Nice.
I was like, oh, I gotta talk about that. I have to talk about that. I have to talk about that.
Yes, I'm ready. I'm
So
ready.
yes,
Yes. Awesome.
a little cross promo there.
Yeah, totally. Listen, like there's too few of us out here. We gotta lift each other up. Like
Mm-hmm.
this isn't about competition. Like I know there's a lot of beefing,
Mm-hmm.
but people love to have Twitter fights and shit like that. But like not when it comes to your leftist fam, like no, just stop.
Yeah,
Let's lift each other up. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. If we're gonna claim to be socialists and communists, it's all about collaboration. It's about
Right.
community. So we should be lifting each other up. We shouldn't be tearing each other down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we need all of our voices. Like that's the point of the left, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the left is about freedom of speech, is about diversity
Yes,
and working
absolutely.
together. So let's
Absolutely.
not, butt heads about
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, for sure. Um, so real briefly, I'm curious, what was the political conversation around Avatar? Because I
Mm-hmm.
love Avatar and Korra.
I mean, personally, I haven't ever watched Avatar, so that was really RJ kind of explaining a lot of that. And most of what I recall from that episode, I would have to rewatch it to kind of refresh myself. But
Click on the spot,
um
go
but
watch
basically,
it.
the idea of a lot of, I remember there was a lot of talk about like the about genocide because of the fire avatars or the firebenders who basically were wiping out a lot of the other like waterbenders and everything. And basically we're talking about a lot of the imperialism that was happening there and connected it to the imperialism that is happening in our real world.
That's cool. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of parallels there. I'm definitely gonna have
Mhm.
to go watch it. That sounds awesome. Yeah, the Fire Nation killed all of the airbenders because they were looking for the
Mhm.
Avatar, right? So
Mhm.
that was
Yeah.
genocide. They're trying to wipe out the waterbenders, and then I'll shut the fuck up. Okay. And then like yeah,
Yeah, you and RJ need to talk.
totally. Totally. So yeah, so why don't you tell me a little bit about your upcoming podcast?
Yeah, so my upcoming podcast I'm gonna be launching hopefully in July. It's called The Killjoy Guide, a leftist feminist podcast. And basically it's a leftist feminist podcast, but you don't have to be feminist to enjoy it, because I'm going to kind of be going beyond those boundaries, to really talk intersectionally, because that's what feminist movement is supposed to be about. It's about looking at the intersections, because women are from we're not a monolith. We have different things that matter to us. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about things that go beyond just reproductive rights, just empowerment. Like, it goes far beyond that. So I definitely want to basically be a bit of a killjoy to some of the other killjoys. Because feminist culture, we're supposed to be disruptors of the status quo. We're supposed to pop that fantasy of basically disrupting that fantasy of, you can go along to get along. It's like, no, if we're gonna make change, we have to be disruptors. And sometimes even killjoys need their own killjoys. Like, hey, get real, this is not what feminism is. And that's part of what I've always wanted, a podcast that disrupts those narratives of, oh, this is what feminism is equality between men and women. Like, actually, it goes much deeper than that. Like, if you're not actually focusing on the deeper meanings of those things, then you're not actually engaging with those topics. So that's what I want my podcast to do. I want it to go a little bit deeper into some of those areas, really get into it and understand what those things are supposed to be, how we're supposed to be building coalitions, how we're supposed to be creating solidarity, and kind of move past all the mainstream bullshit, because all that is just window dressing, and it doesn't actually make any meaningful change because it's not actually disrupting the status quo. So that's what I want the show to be.
Absolutely. Well said. And it's important right now too, because I feel like like feminism has been co-opted by the establishment, right? Absolutely. I mean, it's, I don't want to say that it started with Hillary, but like back in the Bill Clinton years, right? And like this idea of, like, we were talking a little bit before about a woman being able to have it all, right? That definitely came from a pro-Hillary concept, but what the lean in Sheryl Sandberg sort of like brand of feminism, which is for the 1%, right? So what do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. I mean, some of my favorite feminist writers, like Bell Hooks, talked all about that. Like, that type of feminism, that lean in feminism, is really just for the top echelon of women. Like, that doesn't really apply to most women. Whatever you talk about equality between women and men, equality of the sexes, however you want to define that type of feminism, what they're really talking about is equality with men of their own class, of their own race. So, like, oh yeah, we want equality, but I want to be able to be a CEO. I want to be able to, work as a reporter instead of a secretary, which, I mean, women should be able to do those jobs. Absolutely. I 100% believe that. But how does that make equality for all women, considering we all have different needs? And that's where intersectionality really comes into play, because a lot of that bourgeois feminism only helps the bourgeois, as Angela Davis so wonderfully said. But so that's where my feminism really kicks in, is that if we're talking about the mainstream idea of feminism, then that is very much only for the top echelon of women, and they will use feminism to promote their own self-interest. They're not going to do anything for working class women in other countries. Like, we can talk all about, like, oh, women should be able to be educated. We should be educating girls, which is good. That's a good thing. But what are some of the other ways that we're promoting equality? Like, how is bombing Palestine promoting female, women's equality with men? We're just gonna have a woman in a high place who can bomb Palestine too? That makes no sense.
Absolutely. I remember seeing pictures of women in Iraq who were like, in charge of businesses and, looked exactly like American women. And then, we went and bombed the crap out of them. And all of a sudden religious, conservatives came in and took over. Yeah, I mean, poverty, desperation, not natural disaster, but also natural disaster, unnatural disaster from the US. All of these things cause, a sort of going back to what's familiar, right? Like going back to I guess maybe a family structure or a societal structure in which, it feels familiar. No, we don't want to change right now because we are scared already, right?
Absolutely. And the family structure, I mean, isn't really conducive to women, considering how often do you hear about like the second shift where women work all day, but then they don't have a good partner at home who is actually a partner in the home. Right. So they're going home and doing that second shift of watching the kids, taking care of the household. So they have all of these different things put on them as well, on top of working a 9-to-5 job or however many jobs they might have, depending on if they're working class or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then those jobs are not enough for them to support themselves in the first place. So even if they wanted to get out of that situation, they couldn't because they're still dependent on the male salary. Yeah, I mean, like I have lived the ass end of that version of life for a long time now. I'll tell you, it's not fun. It's not fun at all. I mean, I've had to be in certain relationships with men that were, verbally abusive to me and, for money. And it wasn't, I had nowhere else to go, So, it's not, I was promised, like when I was growing up, and I still felt like we were in a boom period, right, in the 90s with the dot-com boom, right? And the Clinton 90s, and everything was just a big, bright hippie future, and that's the future I was promised. That's the future that my parents, I mean, my society around me specifically told me that I could and should be achieving, right? And that what that meant was not necessarily that. I mean, it essentially what it asked me to do was to step into a male role, right? Like we were achieving equality by becoming the male role and also holding down the female role, right? And that's exactly what you're talking about when you have two jobs like that. And what we failed to realize at that point, and probably ever, is that the female experience, the female, I like to call it female culture, the female, skill set, the female, task set, are desperately undervalued because Absolutely. Those were, these were essentially the jobs of like chattel, right? Like women were slaves. Like, I just want to make an aside. Like when I talk about, I really think it's important to talk about female and male culture because up until recently, we have, only acknowledged publicly, officially, two genders, right? And therefore a culture, a skill set, a task list has sort of been aggregated to those two cultures. Life has sort of divided between them. And I don't think that it's productive to throw that completely out the window now that we're having a different gender conversation. But I do think that it's important to say that from this point onwards, we cannot say that there are only two genders, right? I think it's important to say now that there are or were two cultures, and that both, any gender of person can have been involved in either culture. And sometimes people were involved in both, one way or the other, right? So like, for example, like if you had like a a man in like the 1920s who had a sick father but no women, he wasn't married and didn't have any women in the family, he would have had to take care of the sick father and hold down a job, right? So like I actually lived that stratum as well, and it's a terrible one, but he would have had to step in between a caretaking position, which is traditionally female, and you bringing home the bread, which is in white culture traditionally male. And I know that's one of the things that Bell Hooks likes to bring up, and if you would like to speak on this, white feminism, like let's talk about it, because that's a huge issue too that really sort of killed feminism for lefties, didn't it, in the 90s? Like white feminism, the issue of white feminism and the issue of the multiple genders, I think really just scared the crap out of a lot of lefty feminists, and they didn't know where to go with it. And now everybody's calling themselves like humanists, right? And they're afraid to sort of call themselves feminists because it reminds us of the 70s version of it. So you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we can start off by saying, feminism is definitely a sect of humanism. Because it does talk about, the fact that, the boot is on women's necks, not necessarily men's, and is acknowledging that fact. But humanism overall actually doesn't have anything to do with equality. Humanism is about the fact that it's more of a spiritual philosophy, that we don't need a God figure or a otherworldly figure to solve our problems for us, that human problems can be solved by human solutions. And that's what humanism is.
Right. And that was from like the 1700s, right?
Absolutely.
During the time when the period of enlightenment, right? When people were rejecting learnings and stuff. So I think a lot of people who call themselves humanists these days don't recognize that it actually means something completely different.
Absolutely. And I mean, definitions change. Absolutely. We can acknowledge that fact.
Sure.
But I mean, humanism, even much further back than that, because like Henry VIII and Thomas More both considered themselves humanists. So it goes back pretty far as like the Renaissance. But yeah, so humanism is very much a more spiritual aspect, whereas and feminism definitely fits within that, about the idea that human problems can be solved with human solutions. And that's very much where feminism kind of lies, that it's fixing problems to get to human rights by saying, hey, women are human too. We have problems of our own that need to be addressed. Of course, where we come in with multiple genders in that is that, queering that up, like, okay, well, what does it mean to be a woman? Because there is no one way to be a woman. And especially when you consider non-binary people too, it's like, okay, well, where do non-binary people fall into this? Just like you said, like for so long, because of heteropatriarchy, it was women, men. That was all you had. Maybe you had, someone who was intersex, in which they would call them a hermaphrodite or whatever, and you would have then called transsexuals, now transgender. But the idea is that you're right. There's the idea of the masculine and the feminine, the public and the private. And whenever I think of feminism, I don't just think of it as a battle against, hatred of women. Like if we're talking about misogyny, I don't consider misogyny as just hatred of women, but the hatred of the feminine. Because anything associated with anything feminine, you tend to see men kind of retract from it. Like anything feminine, like, oh, you're gay. No, that's bad. Like you're weak. That's bad. Like, so it's the hatred of anything feminine. So if walking into a feminine role or taking on a feminine task or anything deemed feminine by the masculine, then you can't do that. That's not good. You should be masculine. You should be strong. You should be the provider. You can't stay at home. Like the idea of a dad watching his kids for a day, like, oh, you're babysitting your kids. Like, no, he's parenting.
Right.
That's his job as a parent. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I mean, and that just speaks to how undervalued like feminine labor has been forever. I mean, it's considered easy. It's considered, unless a man does it, right? Like take cooking, for example. Like, you know, it obviously was common for women to do the cooking in the home. However, if you had money, then you hired a cook, and that cook was oftentimes a woman, was a head cook, but then sometimes they would bring in a fancy pantsy chef, right? And that chef was always a dude, and that chef always gave orders to the head cook, even though the head cook cooked everything and knew the kitchen better, right? So it's you know, it's interesting. You know, another interesting example is when have you ever read a book called right, I'm gonna forget it, so I'm gonna completely forget the name of this book, so I'm gonna put it on the screen or something right here. In the meantime, I don't even know how I can look it up. Oh, you know what? No, because I'm on my phone. That's why. If I was not on my phone, I'd look it up for you. Oh, wait, can I do it on my browser? Wait, I'm gonna look it up. Sorry, I love this book because I'm really into like witches and like
fun.
Like the history of like actual people who are considered witches, and like the history of Kindle Cloud Reader.
Which, let's be real, anytime a woman was considered a witch, like if she wasn't a healer, she was considered a witch because she broke gender norms.
Exactly. You know, a lot of midwives were considered witches. Anyone who, you know, worked outside of, you know, the male norm.
Yeah, and even your example of the chef, consider how many male chefs are working in restaurants as opposed to female chefs. Like women are known to be the cooks in home, but chefs, like professionally, tend to be male, which is, you would think, would be the opposite, considering women are normally the ones taught to cook.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's mind-blowing how often that is. You can see that in music, right? You can see that in dancing. Come on, give me the title page, you jerk. Okay, so this book is called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, A History.
I have heard it.
Yeah, have you read it?
I haven't read it, but I have heard of it.
Read it. It is excellent. It changed my life. Not in a practical way. Changed my outlook on life. But essentially in this book, and there's other stories too, but in this book, they talk about how like the university doctor became established as like a, you know, the authority in America. And it had largely to do with the discovery of the germ, and how that popularized university medicine over popular sort of like head witch medicine, or like, you know, country apothecary type medicine. So
the local witch doctor.
Right, yeah, or just like the dude who knew about herbs down the bed. You know, it was like, you know, it wasn't even like, you know, that mystical, right? A lot of the times people just knew about herbs, or like knew how to you know, bandage or something. Anyway, so there was a huge push for popular medicine, and women were a part of it because midwives were a huge part of that popular medicine. Obviously, you know, women couldn't go to college for a very long time at that point. And, you know, midwives, you couldn't certainly go to college to be a midwife or be a doctor.
So that's definitely more of an apprentice application.
I think midwives were private. Like, I think midwives were like not licensed up until like the 1950s or something crazy like that. Like, it was a very popular, you know, in a popular movement sense. So anyway, so it wasn't until like the 1910s, the First World War, and Florence Nightingale popularized the idea of a nurse, and that the nurse was subservient to the male doctor. And that's how we sort of got our, like, you know, doctor nurse structure in America. And it's really a crazy story if you think about it, because I mean, I've been a caretaker for several of my family members. Essentially what I do now is I take care of a special needs girl. Essentially I'm her nurse during the day. And there are several times a day where I'm responsible for her life. I mean, that's just how it, there are several times a day where she accidentally punches me in the face, where I get kicked in the stomach, where she, poops on my hand. Like, it just like these are things that in like, any high paying job would be unthinkable. But, it's, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm going off on a thing right now. So I feel really
no, I mean, you're fine. It's actually been shown in just kind of going off of what you're saying, like basically, and I believe it was several years ago now that New York Times actually published a piece on this about pink collar jobs. And that these pink collar jobs, basically, anything from like healthcare to other types of care work, like blue collar jobs were kind of on the downswing because, manufacturing was being shipped off, coal mines and all these things were being shut down. And so all these things were happening. So blue collar jobs were on the way out, whereas pink collar jobs, which was a lot of care work, retail, service jobs, were on the upswing. And particularly healthcare work which particularly nursing, which was always been considered more of a female occupation, those jobs were definitely on the rise. And they showed that in these pink colored jobs, whenever men would take those jobs, even though most men didn't want them, whenever men do work in those jobs, they tend to be paid more than women. Same in teaching. Men still in female-oriented roles are still paid more than women. So I thought that was really interesting whenever I read that, considering like both my parents are nurses. Like, my mom actually became a nurse before my dad did. Like, it was my mom who actually convinced my dad to go into nursing a few years after she did. And then one of the reasons that we live in the United States, I was born in Canada, actually, which thank you for being born in Canada, because I also have a pre-existing condition that I probably would not have been tested for had I been born in the United States. But so both of them were nursing in Canada. My dad lost his job, and the United States was recruiting Canadian nurses. So he moved to the United States by himself for 8 months, leaving my mom up in Canada with 4 kids to raise. It was it was kind of insane.
Epic.
So yeah, so she was raising the 4 kids. Like, my brother basically had to become a third parent. Luckily, we had a good support system of family and friends in our community. So she was able to do it, but not easily. So finally my mom like called him up, like, we can't do this anymore. You've got to come home. But he had a good job down there, so we all moved down to Florida. And my mom, they now work in the same department. My dad still makes more than she does, even though she technically has more years experience. But wow. he had more years experience in that department, as they both work in the operating room. So he had more years in there. But I mean, they're basically equals, but he still makes more money than she does. Wow. But they also kind of prefer that way. If my mom made more money than he did, my dad would probably freak out.
Well, that's something that's changing too, right? With millennials as opposed to older generations, is that I think the men in our generation accept better, that, or the idea that both people should be contributing to the household income. And I mean, especially with our interest in the gender conversation as well. I feel like it's less of a gender roles thing. Not to say that, there aren't plenty of misogynist millennial men, because I know many of them personally. So for sure. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, like if we're going to call this episode Millennial Feminism, right? What would you say defines millennial feminism compared to the feminism of the past?
I definitely think that one of the big differences between our generation and many of the earlier ones is that, there was a period that, for second wave feminists, they had to live during the post-war era of, women have to be at home, or creating the nuclear family, there's still expected to have some kind of education. And of course, this is only true for like middle class white families, like working class women and particularly Black women always had to work. Those were always two income households, always.
Yeah,
but
and
middle, yeah,
like I feel like, you know, not to go off on a thing, I'll let you go back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go
but
ahead.
like I feel like, you know, for, you know, it's true, it's absolutely true that women of color have had to work outside the home forever. That is absolutely true. And I feel like for the first time, our generation is starting to experience some of those realities, right? Because not only are we, you know, being forced to work outside of the home because the economy is so poor and because a lot of us are backsliding because the middle class is shrinking, but you know, it's also some of the jobs that we're going into, right? Because you know, like the independent idea of the 70s was that, oh, I could get a job and be like a man and like do something important in the world, and like that's cute, but like that's not how the working class thinks of their job. Like, that's not how I think of my jobs at all, any of my jobs that I've ever had. But that's how my school told me that I should be thinking of my jobs, my career, you know, my career, darling. So, so I think that's you know, that's an interesting parallel too, that like, for, in some ways, we're able, like women of our generation are able to talk about white feminism because we're also not exactly experiencing it. Right? Like we're starting to experience what, you know, everybody else felt for a while. Right?
Absolutely.
So anyway, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. But I mean, that's what a lot of second wave feminism was all about. It was like, oh, you know, there's this problem with no name. Like there are these boundaries to women in the workplace, like whether it was saying, oh, you know, you have to be a secretary. You can't, or you have to be a nurse. You can't be like we're kind of uncomfortable with you being a doctor. We're kind of uncomfortable with you being a reporter. We prefer you to be the secretary, or you know, the person behind the scenes, or saying like, oh, we will not hire female lawyers. We won't hire you for this particular position because you're a woman. And you know, that's a lot of what second wave feminism was all about, was saying, okay, no, enough of that shit. Like women should be able to work outside the home. We can do the same jobs that men do. So let's get beyond that. And then of course, women's reproductive rights also became a big part of that, with being able to get an abortion, particularly in the late 1960s and early 1970s, getting the ERA passed, which still hasn't passed. Let's be clear on that. It passed, but it's never been ratified. And we're beyond that point. It cannot be ratified at this point. It was ratified very recently in Virginia, I believe. But so it could go back to the House and the Senate. We'll see if it ever does. We'll see if it ever does. But so there's no actual law anywhere that says that women are equal to men. We still don't have the Equality Act either, just so we can put that out there. And I always thought that there was something very limiting about the ERA in that way.
Oh yeah. I definitely want to hear that. I was just going to say, I believe there's also no federal law guaranteeing women the right to own property.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Anyway, go on. I want to hear about what you're saying about the ERA.
Generally, those things tend to happen in the States. So it's like a state thing. I think like Wyoming was actually one of the first states that actually let women own property and have the right to vote, which is nuts. Like people don't understand how progressive the Midwest has historically always been. Just say that. Like Wyoming, Kansas, as you know, the home of like the populist movement, there's a lot of, you know, very populist and egalitarian history in the Midwest that people have no idea about. Like, who would have thought that Wyoming, of all places, would be the place that women first had those rights, which is, it's nuts. But yeah, so there was all these fights like for the ERA, which I honestly think that is actually very limiting, considering, especially now that we know more about gender, is that it shouldn't be equal rights for women to men, but we should be looking at it more within the realm of the Equality Act That's just my personal opinion. But yeah,
I
so
like that.
hmm?
I said I like that take. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so but the main difference, like depending on who you're talking to, like a lot of people tend to think that the only thing that millennial feminists are really dealing with nowadays are like you know, little things, you know, like things.
Microaggressions. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, microaggressions. Thank you. But basically the idea that, you know, basically all we're still worrying about are like these little nitpicky things like microaggressions. But no, it's so much more than that. Like we still don't, even though Roe versus Wade is on the books, like we still don't have the guarantee of being able to get an abortion, because like they are constantly rolling back the rights of women in different states. Even before that, it was some women can't afford it because it costs a lot of money, and women on Medicaid or who go to the Indian health service, the IHS, they can't get access to an abortion because they can't use a Medicaid or any of those services to pay for an abortion. So there's access, but not real access. So things like that, you know, the pay gap is still a thing. And mostly one of the big reasons for the pay gap is not necessarily because of, you know, women or men being paid equally for the same job. That's really more of a bourgeois concept of the pay gap, considering like, yeah, those pay discrepancies are very much in higher echelon jobs. Women and men tend to make the same amount if they're working class, particularly if they're working minimum wage. Women work more minimum wage jobs than men do. And you can look that up. That is a real statistic. Women tend to work more in more lower wage jobs than men. In caretaking work, as you pointed out, which more women fall into, tend to pay less.
Right. And so, you know, the way that they put it too often is that that women choose to do lower paying jobs because they're more comfortable with them. But who values those jobs? Men. So men value women's jobs less than men's. That's what's really going on here. Yeah, I'm comfortable with caretaking because my mother was a teacher and I felt like, you know, I absorbed some of her knowledge in that respect. And so I'm comfortable taking care of a 22-year-old girl. But, you know, what gives you the right to value my labor at $20 an hour when that's just barely keeping me going in New Jersey, you know? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's actually been proven. They've done studies on this, that when women go into more male-dominated industries, guess what? The value of those jobs goes down. Is that insane? The value of those jobs go down. And also women mothers actually tend to make less money than women who are not mothers. Like for each child that a woman has, her value goes down. Versus if men with children, their value goes up. Isn't that crazy?
You're right, though. You're right, though. Okay, so let me tell you this crazy story, man. I used to work at a place that it was in the pharma industry. It was like a small, very small laboratory, but they dealt with like big clients, you know. And pretty much everybody that worked there, except for a few people, were straight from India, like on a work visa. And I just remember one day a guy, very super sweet guy, very nice and good worker or whatever. He had a baby, and this was his first day back from you know, taking care of the baby or whatever. And my supervisor, who dealt with the payroll, came up to him and said, "Congratulations on your baby. You will now be getting such and such a pay increase."
That's insane.
I was like, what? I mean, like literally right in front of like, I was literally like the lowest person in that corporate. I was the secretary. Like, we got people coffee and shit. Like, are you really? That was so common, you know? And like that's maybe there's maybe that's illegal. I don't even think it is, honestly. But it happens. And I think that, you know, it's easy for white people to hear a story like that and dismiss, oh, well, these people are from India and they're different culture and blah, 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 blah. No, this stuff happens everywhere. This stuff happens no matter what culture you are, all over America. This is normal that happens, that you get a pay raise when you have kids if you're a guy, and that you have to take time off if you're a woman and not get paid.
Right. It's very much the case that it's the idea that of men are the breadwinner.
Yes.
They're supposed to bring home the bacon. The woman's supposed to fry it up. You know, so all of that comes down to the idea that, okay, we're going to give you the raise because you're the breadwinner. You're the provider of the family. Whereas a woman, they don't think of that like, oh, you have children at home. Really it's devalued because like, oh, we're just gonna expect you to take time off of work. Like, I know you probably have to go to your son's soccer game. Like, okay, I guess you're gonna miss out on networking. Like, we're gonna go hit the golf clubs at the golf course and negotiate this on the golf course while you're at home with the kids. So have a good day.
Right.
Whereas they never think, maybe dad needs to go to the soccer game. Ever think about that?
Right. Yes, absolutely. And men are supposedly working harder because they are making connections to make money while they're playing golf or having a delicious lunch for $1 billion on company money, you know, whatever the shit. Like, yeah, that's, you know, that's also class. That's also class. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when, you know, when they do want women to take that role, you know, they're perfectly comfortable with women taking the role. But in order to do that, that means that she has to put in just as many hours as men do, considering, you know, men, they have their wives to take care of their kids at home if they have kids. Whereas a woman, if she has to be able to do the exact same thing, guess who gets that care work? Another woman. Very rarely does that go to a man or even to her husband. Very rarely do we have a stay-at-home husband. Very rarely does the man pick up any of the slack. Very rarely.
Yep. Yeah, I think there was a study done that showed that women still do 80% of the housework. Oh, that's not cute. It's not cute.
Not at all.
No. I mean, I'm glad that I'm a lesbian, so.
I'm ace, so I don't have that problem with anyone.
Yeah. Well, you look pretty tidy anyway, so rock on there.
Thank you. Yeah, this is just what you see, so. Right. You should see my ADHD brain over on the other side of the computer.
Yeah, you don't want to see what's on my side either. It's
But I mean, kind of going back to though the idea of like basically being a millennial feminist, especially, is that, you know, we kind of lived through that kind of backlash period of the 80s and the 90s of, okay, feminism is over. Okay, you got equal rights. You're good. You got, you know, you can now have equal jobs and all that nonsense. That's fine. You know, we have a couple women on the Supreme Court. Women are on the rise in different businesses. Oh, everything's going great. Oh, look, a woman can fly a plane. Oh, a woman can do this. A woman can do that. Oh, everything's fantastic. Well, at the same time, we're cutting welfare. We're cutting these different programs that help women. We're creating the shadow state. Things for working class women are becoming harder. So it was this idea of neoliberalism that really came in, especially in the 1980s. And basically, feminism got replaced by this kind of girl power neoliberal feminism. And so we were raised, especially through the 90s, and this kind of whole girl power movement, this idea that, oh yeah, no, girls can do anything that they want to do. If you just work hard, if you just put in the work, you can do anything. You can be president of the United States. You can be, you know, the CEO of a company. You can be on the Supreme Court.
Hillary, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
But seriously.
But, you know, but at the same time, it's like the idea of, oh, but if you're going to do that, then you have to be a cold hard bitch. You can't use your femininity. You have to be either this cold, hard working woman. You have to be like a man in order to achieve those things. Even look at some of the media of that time, like who were the strong women? Sarah Connor, Ripley from Aliens, like they're taking on more male characteristics. Laura Croft was a little bit more masculine. She was taking, basically the idea of, in order for a woman to be good at things, she has to be like a man.
Right, exactly.
But also being devalued for that aspect, as being seen as the bitch, being seen as, not being womanly.
Mm-hmm.
So being devalued for either being feminine or being devalued for being too masculine. And that idea of the double bind, that you can't be too much of either. You can't be too fat, you can't be too thin, you can't be too bossy, you can't be too submissive, you can't be too loud, you can't be too quiet, you can't be too prudish, you can't be too slutty.
Right.
Like, there's all these different barriers that we face,
Yeah.
And so all these different things were happening in tandem, all this kind of highlighting of women, especially young women's sexuality. Look at Britney Spears. Like, and so we were looking at all these different things, and finally in like the kind of early 2010s, we finally had this illusion, like, you know what, no, this shit is ridiculous. And especially after 2008, when the market crashed, like all these different things are all kind of happen all at the same time. And as millennials were really coming into, coming of age, we're seeing like, oh no, sexism is still alive and well. Like, look at what's happening to Britney Spears and all these different people in magazines. Look at women, still working their asses off, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
So even though we were told, go to college, get your education. Now we're the most educated generation. The Generation Z, I'm sure, will be passing us soon on that regard, but we have the most education, but we're making the least money.
Yeah.
We're told get your education and you'll be able to get a good job. Every single entry-level job requires like 5 years experience. Where are you supposed to get that experience? But then we're told, hey, you got to put in the grunt work. Like, you can't just walk into a job with it's like, hello, what do you want me to get the education for? And now you won't give me the job because I don't have experience. How am I supposed to get the experience? Oh, an unpaid internship.
Yeah.
But guess what? The only people who can do unpaid internships are people who already have money.
Dang. Yes, absolutely.
So, and this is one of the reasons why particularly millennials are starting to become more socialist, because we're realizing, all this crap that you told me growing up is all bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you said I could have it all. That's bullshit. You told me that if I worked my ass off, I could, be this or that or this or that. That's bullshit.
Yeah.
I got all that education. I can't use it because there are no jobs available.
Right. I mean, what good is it? What good is it if you take the most, like, because that was what they told us, right? Like, that was the like Aaron Sorkin message of our youth, was that, education is the silver bullet. I specifically remember that being on West Wing. Like, education is the silver bullet. And, that's cute until you graduate into an economy where there are less jobs than there are people. So how does that make sense? I mean, if literally everyone who graduated wanted a job, they couldn't get it, right? Because there weren't enough. I mean, that's essentially what we were facing. We didn't have people understanding that at the time, because if you look at the unemployment rates, in the peak of the recession depression, as I like to call it, in 2010, you'll see that for our age group, they hit 25%. That is the unemployment rate of the Great Depression in the 1930s. For other age groups, it was much more close to the national average, and I don't think it got any worse than maybe 11%. And that is a huge difference. That is a huge difference, especially when you're starting off your life, because also older generations have already had a chance to accrue some wealth before, the hard times hit. So they had something to live off, whereas we had to couch surf. And that's why we were the generation that lived on our parents' couches, right? That's why we're the generation that were working on, blogs and whatever in our spare time and podcasts out of the desperate hope that it would, like get us something someday, because this is our career. We don't get paid for our career. Our career is what we do in our free time. What we do for work is what keeps us going during the day. And then we come home at night and work on our career. Right?
Absolutely.
And you can't, again, like this is a reality that has existed for a long time for working class people, for people of color, but it is just starting to hit white people of our generation that's a reality. And then that like there was somehow before the dream that even the poorest of us could make it, could beat the system. I think I saw a study that said like that millennials strongly believe that the world is fucked, but they still believe they can beat the system.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I think that's realistic for our generation, because we did grow up in a boom period, and we did have a taste of that reality, right? When like the famous idea of somebody sitting in their garage and inventing the next great video game, and then all of a sudden they're rich, or like fucking PewDiePie, like playing video games and then becoming the best YouTuber on the planet. Like that's literally how a lot of people who are rich now, who are owning the PR market now, like Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, he's one of my favorite people to sort of yell at in my mind, because like the captain of, if you just work until 2 a.m. every day, like you can fucking crush it. You can just crush it. God. That's cute. But first of all,
sleep's important.
Well, yeah, number one. And number two, he didn't have to fold someone else's underwear. He didn't have to make other people's lunch. He had that done for him. So when he busted his ass till 2 a.m. every day, when he went to high school and then figured out how to make millions of dollars selling baseball cards, which is apparently how he got his start, he was doing it on his dad's already $1 million wine business. And he was doing it while his mom was making him dinner and doing his laundry. So that's not, that's a reality a lot of us are starting to realize, that there is no silver bullet, because society itself is broken and it will not allow us to go beyond a certain point. It will not allow us to break beyond the glass ceiling, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because I was recently watching this this video by The Take about like the rise and fall of, Rory Gilmore. And especially she was a character on the Gilmore Girls. Oh, okay, she was the daughter. Basically, it's a show about a mother and daughter. Like the mom was a teen mom, and she was the daughter of 2 very rich people, but she basically gave all that up to go live on her own and raise her kid on her own without the dad or anything. She started at the very bottom of a business, rose to the top. Basically, was a self-starter. And this idea that she wanted more for her daughter than she had for herself, because she threw all that away so that way she could be self-reliant, and because she didn't want to live in her parents' entitled world, that socialite existence of debutante balls and all that nonsense. But then when it came to her daughter's education, she's like, ever since she was a baby, I dreamt of her going to Harvard. And so she wanted all the best things for her daughter. So she had to go back to her parents to get money to send her to private school. That way she could get the very best education that she possibly could, which of course she wouldn't have been able to do that without her parents' money.
Yeah.
She would not have been able to do that without her parents' money. But basically created this whole relationship where Rory then gets put into this world of under learning entitlement that she never had to want for anything. She basically got served everything on a silver platter. She didn't have to try. She didn't have to work hard. At any time that she got confronted, and she always had this dream of, I'm going to be the next Christiane Amanpour. I'm going to go to Harvard and become a journalist. I'm going to become the next Christiane Amanpour, which, I mean, only someone who went to Harvard could be the next Christiane Amanpour, considering that's how the mainstream media works. You have to have that kind of background.
Right.
To go work at the New York Times or whatever. But whenever it came time for her to face a challenge, like someone telling her, I don't think you have the chops to be a journalist, she would fold. She would have like this whole crisis of identity and like basically fall back into entitlement and be able to live off her grandparents' wealth and their name. Like I'm a Gilmore. What are you telling me? I can't do this. Like, what's the problem? So she's basically this idea of, the middle class entitled millennial. And then even when she did graduate at like the top of her class, like she was handed a lot of opportunity, like being the editor of the Yale Daily News, being, getting these different opportunities. She was handed a lot of it. Whenever it came to her own work ethic, after she graduated and did all these things, she failed. She fell on her face, ended up moving back with her mom because eventually the jig was up.
Yeah.
Like and like, honestly, I kind of related a little too much to that, considering, I had, unfortunately, I didn't have, even though with my ADHD brain, I didn't have to try that hard to be good at school. It came very naturally to me. I could coast by and I could write a paper at midnight the night before and get an A. And so I didn't have to try that hard. But then when everything came up, it kind of kicked me in the ass. And that same entitled millennial is like, that whole idea is like, okay, you get everything kind of handed to you. You get told you could be anything in the world. So I kind of lived that existence a little bit. But then when it came to actually getting a job, okay, I don't have any skills. What skills do I have? I don't know.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit more, because that is the like perfect example of like what you described to me about the Gilmore Girls was the perfect example of like a boomer perception of like what happened to both them and us during our childhood, right? So I feel like, okay, firstly, let me say that it was like sort of popular in the hippie movement to have turned away from your parents' money and lived the hippie life, okay? And that's, again, cute, but that's also, and that's not something I realized at the time, because my parents were boomers. And I think that, not necessarily all millennial parents are boomers. It depends on, how old they were and who you are. Mine just happened to work out that way. But
yeah, mine were boomers as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I feel, So that is not a reality I fully understood when I was growing up. Like it didn't occur to me that hippies were living this sort of like fake poverty, right? To be cool, right? Because later on in my life, actually, like I started hitting real poverty, and like when I was telling my godparents about it, who were the same age, one of my godparents said, "Wow, you are so cool." I was like, I haven't thought about being cool since I was in high school. What are you saying? Like, what? Like, who cares? Who actually gives a shit about being cool? Like that, that to me, that is such a privilege to care about being cool. That's ridiculous. First of all, that you would ever say that. So I actually sort of lived a little bit that life too, because my mom was a teacher at a private school. So I went to private school from 5th grade until, college as well. And I definitely grew up with rich kids. I definitely was around that, and was never able to fully fit in with those people, even though I'm still friends with some of them, and, they were nice sometimes and whatever. But, it's just like, I was always like they called me a fat brat, a faculty brat when I was in middle school. I like remember that. But when I graduated, I didn't get any of those opportunities because I wasn't related to the people with money, right? So I had to either like really, really kiss ass and get in there and fucking make connections. And I was not savvy enough at the time to do that. You know, or I didn't understand that opportunities would not be handed to me because when boomers were getting jobs for the first time in the 70s, there were plenty of fucking jobs to get. There were. And you could get a job if you just had a bachelor's degree in any fucking thing. You know, I went and I got mine in theater, and that was dumb. I was told repeatedly, and I couldn't get any job. Like, how dare you waste your life on going to theater? And I mean, like, I had to write like thesis papers and stuff. Like, I'm not stupid. Like, we didn't just, you know, go around emoting all day. Like, I had work to do like everyone else. Like, you know, I learned skills. So anyway, so I feel like when it got to the point where we got out of school and we started to, you know, try to get into the work world, we were being gaslit to a point where we were afraid to speak out for ourselves.
Absolutely.
If we had in any way like pushed against the entitled moniker, you know, in any way tried to challenge stereotypes that were totally put on us from outsiders, like not like. So the thing about like, I feel like we are in some ways like a silent generation, because what was like our culture, what was cultural about us was what older people saw of us, what we could do around the times when we weren't busting ass to try to make a living. So, you know, like we never really got to, you know, have, you know, hippie beat parties where we like discuss, you know, I mean, and we did some of that because again, we were, I think, very instrumental in the gender conversation, that we were exploring a lot of different, you know, relationships in ways, you know, that past generations maybe hadn't talked about as much. But, you know, aside from that, like, you know, we were afraid to be like, yeah, we are millennials. Like, you guys are old and we're millennials, man. Like, none of us had that pride. We were all ashamed of being millennials, and we were afraid to identify with millennials. We were tried to make it sound like we were the cool millennial, right? Like, we were talking to an X or a boomer, specifically if they had a job that we wanted to get a piece of, that we would try to make it sound like, oh, we're not like that, you know, oh, those type, they're totally entitled. I'm not like that, you know, like, but that was never the real story for our generation, because what they considered to be entitled was, you know, either who actually got those opportunities, which was entitled rich people who will be entitled no matter how old they are or what generation they're in, or they saw people out of work and assumed it was laziness. And that's, and absolutely. I believe that, you know, our generation was done a huge disservice in that. Mentally, 100%. Mentally, we still feel shame. We still feel shame for who we are. And it's stupid because we don't need to. We don't need to. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's definitely something that, you know, I think a lot about is that we were, you know, we came of age in a very specific episteme, which for those who don't know what that means, that is from Raymond Williams, who basically said that there are many different factors that make up a specific moment in time. And that's what an episteme is basically, you could think of it even like an episode. Different factors all came together and created this moment that we came of age in, of, you know, having lived through this whole thing of not only that, but the Iraq War at the same time. And a lot of our people our age going off and being killed in other countries. You know, so we all came of age at the moment 9/11. Like the earliest millennials were just graduating high school at the moment that the Iraq War was happening.
Yes.
Like I remember very clearly You know, I had just started high school, and they were talking about, you know, weapons of mass destruction and the Iraq War and going into Iraq. I was like, I had just learned about Vietnam like a few months earlier, and I was like, this is going to be Vietnam all over again. And I was only in ninth grade.
Right.
Like, I knew in ninth grade that the Iraq War is a bad idea. I was like, this is going to be another Vietnam. This is going to be our generation's Vietnam. And I was right on that fact.
But God help you if you said that out loud, right?
Right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Nobody would say that, but it was, you're absolutely right. It's so interesting. I mean, we didn't have the room to sort of, you know, like mass assemble, right? Like they did because of the recession depression hit us right in the knee. That's right.
Exactly. So we had the dot-com crash right around that time. We had Iraq War. Then we had the recession in 2008, just as a lot of us were graduating from college. Right. So all these degrees that we worked so hard to get, because they said, go to college, get an education. And then all of a sudden we're going out into the workforce going, okay, there are no jobs available. What the fuck am I supposed to do with this degree that I just got? Basically a worthless piece of paper. Right. And unless, of course, you are from the upper echelons of society, if you were a privileged kid, it's like, I mean, even though I have, you know, I was middle class, you know, I went to community college first. I went through on scholarships, and I still had to get student loans, even just to pay my rent. Because, and I still had a job. Like, one of the reasons, like, when I went to grad school, I chose not to get a job except for my graduate assistantship, because I wanted to focus on schooling. I knew how hard it was going through my bachelor's, not only doing extracurricular activities, but having a job too. And doing 4 classes. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
And still having a somewhat of a social life.
Right.
So like being able to do all those things that they tell you to do during college, you know, join clubs, have a job, you know, do 4 classes, that way you can be done in 4 years or how many years. And very often, like, I would take up 4 classes, and then because, you know, I have ADHD and all that, and I had a lot of trouble focusing on doing the work. So eventually I'd be like, okay, I'm dropping that class because I'm not interested in it and I'm not doing well in it. So that class has got to go. So that way I can focus on these other 3. Because God help me, for just my brain working, I couldn't do it. And like, even though I love school, I absolutely love school. I love going to school. I love being educated. I love learning. Is a big thing. I love learning, but I have really bad focus issues. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know I had ADHD until very recently. I still haven't been formally diagnosed, but I didn't occur to me until very recently that that's what my problem has always been. But I could always, just like I said before, I always had that ability that I had that natural ability. I could just, you know, write that paper the night before and still get an A or a B. And I'd be like, okay, that's fine. I'm cool with that. But so a lot of my problems, I think, stem a lot from that. But I also had anxiety too. So it made it difficult that after I got out of school, it's like, okay, I don't know how the hell to interview for jobs because it makes me fucking nervous. Sure. Like I have really high anxiety, and it's really hard for me to focus too long, especially on like job searching, like going through like, okay, I guess I could do that. I don't know. But it says I have to have this much experience. Like, I don't really know how to do that. Like, I don't know. And like all of a sudden anxiety hits, and I'm like, okay, I gotta put that away. I don't work on it for another 3 weeks.
Well, and society reinforces that too, because I've seen several articles that claim that millennials have a skills gap, that there is just something unemployable about millennials. Right. And that's the biggest horseshit I've ever fucking heard. Because how many years have we been to school in comparison to previous generations? Absolutely. B, how many free internships have we labored under, which was, you know, I worked at an internship for Scholastic. Oh,
lucky you.
It was awesome. It was so cool. I worked for the print that published Harry Potter, and I was over It was so cool. And my boss was really, really nice. And she was, you know, doing me a favor, like by letting me have this internship, but it was unpaid. And I essentially did what an assistant editor would have done. Because in this imprint, she was a senior editor and there was one other senior editor. And I was her assistant that was, you know, when I could be there, which was like 1 day a week. And the other woman who was the other person's actual editorial assistant, like that was her official job title, was literally doing the same jobs I was doing. So, I mean, this is, you know, this is not make work. This is not learning. This is not getting people coffee. I never got anyone coffee at my internships. I was doing real, actual paid people's work for no money. And then when I asked her, you know, I'm going through some serious financial issues. Like towards the end of my master's degree, I was going extremely broke trying to take care of my grandfather. And I needed a real job. And it was getting to the point where I could either find a real job within a few months, or I had to move back to New Jersey to sleep on my grandpa's couch, which is what I eventually did. So I asked her, I said, we've been together for a year. You seem to like me. I'm doing all the things that, you know, and I made a whole pitch. I like, you know, practiced in the mirror and I wrote her a big letter and all the things you're supposed to do, you know, and she said, she laughed. Okay. First. And then, and then said, you know, she was nice. She was like, I didn't mean to laugh at you, but like, I have asked so many times for an editorial assistant because I clearly need one. Well, we don't have the money in the budget. She's like, and she made it clear to me that if she had the money in the budget, she probably would have hired the person who was there before me and not me.
Wow.
So it was weird at all, but
that's crazy.
But I mean, that's really like she wasn't that much older than me. And that was the crazy part. Cause I think at the time I was like maybe 28 and she was like mid 30s. So she was like a very young Gen X. Right. And I asked her how she got this job. And she told me that after her bachelor's degree, she went to some conference where she met the head of the current imprint that she was working for. They met, they fell in love. And I mean, not really, you know, like for friends. And, and then he hired her immediately. And then she's worked there for like 13 years at the biggest, you know, at the imprint that published Harry Potter in America in school. I mean, can you imagine that, you know, like that literally would never have happened to me.
Right.
Literally never, because there weren't opportunities like that anymore.
Right.
I mean, like I met her sort of at an opportunity, but then again, that opportunity should have worked out for me. Right. Like that's a situation where I spent a year doing, you know, like learning the job. And if she didn't have money in her budget, she should have recommended me to another department, but nobody,
or even another house.
Right. Well, yeah, but
because they're all connected. Let's be realistic.
Totally.
Yeah, because I know very well, like, because I'm kind of in a similar. I wanted to get into the publishing industry for a while. Yeah, and, like to a point where I actually went to the Denver Publishing Institute for a summer. Awesome. So I was in Denver for a month and learned all these different things. And I was told by several people like, oh, you're really good at marketing. You should get into marketing. But the problem was, like, I had saved up. I was working at a library at the time, at a public library. I was there for 5 years. At this point, I'd been there for maybe a year.
And they pay shit.
Oh
yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, I was making maybe $10 an hour.
Yeah.
Working full time. I mean, I got benefits and everything, but I was only working for $10 an hour. I had saved up all this money. My dad had lent me some money as well, so that way I could go to this program, because I thought, this is my way in. I'm going to get a job. Because one of my classmates from University of South Florida that I went to school with, she had gone and ended up getting a job and everything. So I was like, okay, this is my ticket. So I spent a month in Denver learning all the ins and outs about the Publishing Institute or about the publishing industry. But then once it came to the end, you know, I had to go home because I didn't have any money left.
Right.
whereas some of them, they were able to just like, okay, we're all like 3 of us are going to go to New York City. We're going to get an apartment. We're going to do what they tell us, which they said you have to live in New York City or, write your address as being in New York City, because that's the only way you're going to get it in with any of these companies.
Right.
So I live in a very rural area. I didn't have a lot of money. So I was like I was using my friends like, hey, can I use your address to get to put an application into this company? But then once I would get a call, I couldn't go to interview.
Right.
I had to do like Skype interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And still, like, there was no way if they wanted an in-person interview, I was like, there's no way for me to get there.
Yeah.
I have no money.
Yeah.
So basically all that education that I had just spent money on was gone.
Right.
It was worthless to me because and that's one of the problems with a lot of these opportunities is that unless you're in that area, like unless you're wealthy, can live in New York City, you're basically fucked.
Yep.
Either that or maybe you can work for like a very small indie publisher, but those opportunities are very rare too.
And they don't pay great.
They don't pay great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. And the publishing industry at the time that I was looking for a job was also going through like the ebook revolution. So like that was scare for everybody, even though clearly they still have jobs today, so they could call me about it.
Right.
But it is true that the publishing industry is shrinking in comparison to, self-publishers. And that, that was the atmosphere in which I was trying to get a job there. And I did have a New York address, and I still didn't get callbacks because literally just nobody had the money to hire anyone. I mean, that's just how it was.
And that's one of the unfortunate realities about a lot of these different industries is that they hire unpaid internships because guess what? They're just consolidating, making it so that they're paying people less to do more work.
Right.
Like productivity has shown to be going up, but wages have stagnated since like the 1970s.
Right.
So if you're doing more and more work for not an increase of pay, like what the fuck do you expect is gonna happen?
Yeah.
When people our age come in and say we're expecting to be able to at least live on a job, like we got all this education for, and we walk in going expecting a certain amount of pay, expecting benefits, and we're laughed off because we're expecting those things that we worked our asses off to get.
Yeah.
But we're expected to do grunt work and work for poverty wages because that's what you did.
Well, that's what they did for a hot second. And
I know, right?
Right?
Exactly.
But it's literally embarrassing. Like I went through a conversation with myself. Should I put my retail experience on my resume when I'm applying for these publishing jobs?
Right.
Because it looks embarrassing. But that was what I had to do to survive. So I mean that's something else I think that a class issue that
absolutely
like we all expected to have upward mobility and we didn't get it. I mean, that's
absolutely
yeah.
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 And it's crazy to hear is that they actually did a study recently that showed that employers, when they're in interviews, it takes them 7 seconds of hearing you talk to realize what class you are and decide whether or not to hire you.
Wow. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So if you sound elitist, you are more likely to get hired than someone who sounds like they're from the middle or lower class. If you sound like you went to Harvard or you have connections like, oh, I know so-and-so, therefore I know I can get it into this job. You're like, put me in for this.
Right.
And that's what's crazy is that even though I had friends in the industry and I had friends who could, pass on my resume, it very rarely worked out because there was nothing I could do because I couldn't be there. So even those connections, unless you are there and you can network and meet people, you're fucked.
Right. Right. Because the reality is that, you know, like the university structure and the professional structure is built for already rich people.
Absolutely.
And, you know, this is, again, this is, we're in a backslide and we didn't expect to be. Man,
absolutely. And this is what we mean by like millennial feminism, is that, you know, we came of age in a very specific time of seeing, you know, being told, you know, we can do anything, you know, girl power and all that, all that bullshit. And while we were experiencing that, while we were getting all that empowerment bullshit, the reality was there was no upward mobility for, you know, people who are working class. You know, we're working harder, we're working more jobs. Some people are working more jobs or are unemployed. We're in a moment, particularly our generation and Generation Z coming up after us.
Yeah, it's
getting harder. Yeah, and we're doing more work for less pay.
Absolutely.
So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about millennial feminism. It's not just microaggressions and sexual harassment, being called a slut, and all these different little itty bitty things. It's like
slut. I mean, yeah, millennial feminism is a lot of things, right? Like millennial feminism is also like, you know, like the embrace of sex work, because a lot of us had to do that to survive. I had to do that for a short period of time to survive.
But that's basically because we've been gaslit our entire lives to believe that the world is one way, and it's bullshit. It's not that way at all.
No. And well, that's the thing too, right? Like, because we were told also that we were so lucky to be born when we were. We were so lucky to be American women when we were American women because of the efforts of the 70s and the boomers. And you know, all praise be the boomers, and they fixed everything about feminism. But then, you know, and I bought that shit. I bought that shit a lot up until I had it, when I had to get a job. And all of a sudden I started to realize my boobs got me that job. You know, all of a sudden I started to realize, you know, like I didn't get this other job. So I had one instance where I applied for a job that I was extremely qualified for at I can't remember what it was now, but it was like essentially like a secretary firm. Okay. And I was going for a job that would have paid me $50,000 a year. Okay. So to me, that was like, oh, I've never made that so much money.
I know, right?
So comfortable. Like I could finally pay off my debts and whatever. Like I could be independent. Like that to me would be like, in some ways, my dream job, even though the job itself would have been something I had no interest in doing, you know? So, but anyway, I found out. So I had talked to a recruiter on the phone who was coaching me through this. And like, I had spoken to the first person on the phone, like my preliminary interview, and everyone loved me. I was brilliant, whatever. And then nobody had seen me in person at that point. And then I went to the interview, and I went in what I thought was a nice, you know, office outfit. It was like, you know, kind of a nicely patterned long dress with like a sweater, cardigan, or whatever the fuck. And I was told that I met with 2 people. I was supposed to meet with 4. I was told that the 2 people that I did not meet with were the 2 people that actually had the power to hire me. And they took they walked past my room, which had like glass behind me so that like you could see my ass sitting in the window, which is like, why would you do that to somebody? And so they literally walked by my room and decided not to speak to me. And that's why I did not get a job. Yeah. Because I was told. So I got a call from the recruiter that was like, you know, the third party that was trying to help me out. And she said, I'm so upset. I'm so embarrassed. Like, you embarrassed me because they told me that you were unprofessional, that you were dressed unprofessionally. And I said, I have no idea what they're talking about. I was totally professional. Like, I work in an office currently. This is what I would wear to work. Like, I was wearing makeup. Like, what? I was unprofessional? Are you joking me? And the fact that they thought that I was unprofessional based on what I looked like seated from behind says to me that it had nothing to do with what I was wearing and a lot to do with how big my ass is. I mean, what else could it have been? And all the other girls that were at this office were young and cute and skinny. You know, I mean, who better to serve, you know, the busy lawyers and whoever of the 1% that have to run around the world.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, like these are issues that like they should, like that reality to me should have been done. That should have been done. I got a theater for that specific reason, because I couldn't get a part being a fat woman. I was into musicals. I couldn't get a part being a fat woman and a story. And that's why I got out of it. And I was like, well, the real world isn't like that anymore. This is, you know, fucking girl powered, whatever. Right. And I step out into the real world and find out it's exactly like that. It's exactly like that.
Yeah. The world is designed for a very specific type of person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a conversation with my godmother, who's a boomer, and she told me, she was like, well, you don't understand how it was back in the day. Like we used to be asked if we were married in a job interview and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, the job that I was at just then, they asked me if I was married in my job interview. That still happens. Even if that's against the law, it still happens, you know? Like, and that's, you know, and we should bridge that into like Me Too a little bit, because I don't feel comfortable having a millennial feminism episode without talking about Me Too a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But that's, I mean, and I think, you know, Me Too was a huge part of that. So just because it's illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen, is something that we need to say more and more and more and more. Me Too is unfortunately just a part of that, because in ways of discrimination, that also happens still. And you can't, a lot of times you can't call it out as the person who receives that kind of discrimination, because again, like for my example, which is a very, you know, a cute example compared to what could have, you know, been terrible. It is that, you know, how can I possibly make the case that they didn't give me the job because I was fat if they're calling me unprofessional and making all of these other accusations about me, right?
When they hadn't even spoken to you.
Exactly. So I can't, there's no clear case there. No lawyer in the right mind would take that on. And I wouldn't have the money to hire one if they did. Right?
Absolutely.
So it's, you know, people who are in power know how to get away with stuff. And that's still a reality. So let's bridge into Me Too. Let's take this right on down the path here. So you want to kick it off?
And I think that's definitely one of the other aspects of our generation too, is like some academics have written about us as the fourth wave, not as the third wave. Like the third wave was, you know, a lot of bringing in intersectionality and diversity and, you know, unwhiting the feminist movement, making it more diverse. But the fourth wave is the digital activism wave of saying like, okay, all of our activism is happening online. You can see that with, you know, Femme Futures, Yes All Women, you know, is not okay, Me Too, and all these other hashtag activism, all these different modes in which we communicated, slut walk, and all these different ways that we communicated online and organized online. Because that's the way that we're now communicating with one another. It's not, you know, by mail lists like they used to do. We're now be able to communicate. I can now, like, I would never have met you had it not been for Twitter. When I was a senior in high school, I was doing dual enrollment at our community college. So I was able to get a Facebook page, but it was just me communicating with, you know, my circle of friends. And, you know, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden there's Twitter, there's Instagram, there's, you know, all these different ways of communicating. And, you know, Twitter is still my number one, even though I do spend some time on Facebook, but mostly just to, like, I don't have really any Facebook friends except for like really close friends and family, because I don't give out that information. It's like, if like, if I'm not your friend in real life, I'm not gonna friend you. So don't friend me on Facebook. Like, even people that I knew in high school, I won't friend them because I'm like, what? Why the hell do you give a shit about my life? You didn't give a shit then.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I don't really talk to a lot of people on Facebook, except unless I know them pretty well. But Twitter is, like an extension of me now. And that's how I came across a lot of these different things. And I even researched a lot of hashtag activism for when I was in school. My grad school for my MA, my thesis was all about Me Too as survivor discourse. That's what I wrote my thesis about. So I was deeply entrenched in trying to understand Me Too and how it was an extension of feminist organizing. So
tell us more about your thesis.
So my thesis, I wrote it, it's basically looking at it as survivor discourse and as an extension of feminist movement, basically to show, and one of my first chapters was kind of outlining how rape discourse went from basically, like the Andrea Dworkins and Kate Millett and those types of authors, and how they're passing out leaflets about these different things. War groups during the 1970s, like these vigilante groups who would actually go out and like do vigilante acts against rapists. There were women who would who papered a man's wedding. They put out flyers at his rehearsal dinner or whatever at his wedding, saying that that he's a rapist because he had assaulted a woman at his bachelor party. And so they papered his wedding.
Wow, that's an awesome story.
Yeah, or they would if there was a sexual harasser, like someone who was following a woman home, that woman would tell that vigilante group, and they would follow him home, and they would harass him in return, basically. And as a vigilante way of basically telling men, like, this is not okay, like catcalling men back after they were catcalling them, different things like this. Like, it was outrageous, the things that they were doing, and we have definitely picked up some of those things ourselves. But basically the idea of the zine back in the 60s and 70s to books to these different avenues of telling our stories and understanding, like finding new ways of talking about sexual violence, and like how we all have these different stories, and that there's a spectrum on which it lays, which I have this book here. Yeah, this is actually a great book to read called Surviving Sexual Violence by Liz Kelly. I learned a lot from this book about the continuum of violence against women, about how it's basically the idea of rape culture, the fact that there are these categories of violence against women that are normalized, like sexual harassment, catcalling, microaggressions, and they get worse and worse and worse as you get up to the top, up to like rape and murder. But when we're okay with these little versions of sexism, it makes it easier to normalize the worse versions. And even to a point where if a woman is raped or sexually assaulted, like, what were you wearing? It's always the woman's fault. It's never the man's fault, because we live in that rape culture. And every single woman has some kind of experience of sexual violence. And that's something that, Yes All Women and Me Too and these different hashtags have really brought up. Like, why I left, different thing. We all have these different experiences. We're just not talking about them. And that's what Me Too especially really brought up, is that it was a communication tool for us to talk about our different experiences. And it was a kind of a way of almost consciousness raising, us sharing our experiences with each other. That's how consciousness raising started, is that it was women sitting together in a room talking about their experiences and saying, like, okay, so this happened to you, this happened to you, this happened to you, this happened to you, this happened to me. So there's something that we're all sharing here. We all have this experience. Maybe we should theorize about that.
Yeah.
And that's how feminist theory came about. And that's kind of what we're doing now through Me Too. It's a communication tool that we're able to use to theorize about our united experience.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of looking at it. I love that. Can you comment on the now unpopularity of Me Too? Let's put it that way. That Me Too was once so popular when we had Trump in office, and then all of a sudden we elected a different rapist.
Yeah.
And now no one wants to talk about Me Too anymore. Now it's kind of a bad word. Now Alyssa Milano like took it back. She's like saying, well, maybe we shouldn't believe all women. I don't know, some women, blah, 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 blah. Are you fucking kidding me? Anyway, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually writing a piece on it. I never wrote it, unfortunately. I still kind of want to. It's just this, as you basically said, like, believe all women with an asterisk, as long as it's not politically inconvenient. And that's basically what it boils down to, is that it became a partisan weapon when it should never have been that.
Absolutely.
Like, if you're going to believe women, it can't be a partisan deal. And this is one of the hard parts about it. Like, whenever you think about like Harvey Weinstein, who was, the big catalyst for the Me Too movement, is, Harvey Weinstein was a Democratic Party donor. We should have known this back then. Like, if we're talking partisanship, Harvey Weinstein was a Democratic Party donor. Why are you protecting him? And Hillary Clinton protected him. She refused to give Ronan Farrow an interview because he was doing the Harvey Weinstein story. She refused to do it. She was protecting Harvey Weinstein. When we talk about women, believing women, and particularly when we think about like what happened to Tara Reade, like Anita Dunn was one of the founders of Time's Up. She was on the board of directors. She was also working for Joe Biden. So there was a conflict of interest there.
Big conflict, yeah.
And the fact, like Rose McGowan, I feel like has been totally revelatory on that whole issue, particularly with Time's Up. Time's Up was basically, a cover up for whatever was happening at CAA and was happening with a lot of these people. Is like, oh, we should start an organization to, like, okay, but you can hide behind anything that you fucking want. Like, Joe Biden can hide behind the sexual, the Violence Against Women Act. Harvey Weinstein, if he wanted to, could hide behind different powerful women who he helped. Harvey Weinstein could hide behind donations that he made to different women's organizations. This is what they do. That's how they hide what they're doing. They say, oh no, I support women, while in the background they're sexually harassing women, they're assaulting women. So this is not a partisan game.
No,
this is not just, oh, Trump bad.
Right.
If you're going to say believe women, it cannot be partisan. You have to actually believe women.
Absolutely.
It's like just the same as, you want to call Gretchen Carlson a hero for, taking down Roger Ailes. Fine. Cheer on Gretchen Wilson. That's fine.
Yeah.
Because she did not deserve that. But that doesn't mean that you can then, and this kind of goes around to women's own perpetuation of this, is that Gretchen Carlson was also, involved in what was going on with Miss America and some of the harassment going on with women in Miss America. It's like, just because you're an abuser doesn't mean, or just because you're abused doesn't mean that you don't also perpetuate a lot of these things. We all have internalized sexism because we live in patriarchy.
Right.
This is all stuff we have to unlearn.
Right.
So just like, we all perpetuate this nonsense because we live in patriarchy. We can't opt out of it.
Right.
Like the only thing we can do is unlearn it and try our best to not perpetuate this nonsense. But it is hard to do. And unfortunately, that's reality that we're seeing with Me Too, is that a lot of the people who said Me Too, who weaponized it against different parties, are now the ones who, once they see one of their allies being targeted, they're saying, oh no, this doesn't jive.
Right.
Like, which, I mean, if you want to defend a friend who is, where you say, oh no, my friend would never do that. Like Lena Dunham had a moment like this, like where one of her male friends was a target of Me Too, and she defended him, and people came after her. It's like,
yeah, I remember that.
It's fine to want to defend a friend, but when people are telling you your friend did this, it would behoove you to say, okay, well, maybe I should be questioning how well I know my friend.
Right.
Which, I mean, if, like, even in an instance like Shahid Buttar, like, I would probably defend Shahid Buttar if I knew the story of what was going on. But you also have to hear, if it turns out that it's all false, then fine. But particularly with a case like Tara Reade, who had more evidence on her side than even Christine Blasey Ford.
Yes.
It's kind of ridiculous to defend Christine Blasey Ford because she's on your team,
right?
Then and not defend Tara Reade.
Exactly.
When there's more evidence in favor of her, and call her a liar. Like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when, to me, it seems like just judging from Biden's character.
There's a pattern there.
There's a pattern. I mean, how is it not obvious? You know what I'm saying? You go around sniffing hair, and you go around talking about, you know, what did he say the other week? He said, like,
about the girl's barrettes. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, look at her with her barrettes and sitting cross-legged and what? Stop.
Looking like you're 19 years old.
Yeah. Ew. I mean, just like, no. Like, how is that not exactly what Trump was? Right?
It's the same as like Harvey Weinstein, like Rose McGowan, like talked about how, like, talking to Ben Affleck after it had happened, and you know, and him saying, I told him not to do that anymore. Like, you fucking knew
to do that anymore. Are you fucking joking me?
Like,
that's an open secret, right? Like,
right? Whoa. Or Brad Pitt, like, going after Weinstein and telling him, don't touch my girl, when what happened to Gwyneth Paltrow. Like, why did no one speak out? Like, you knew this shit was happening.
Right.
And it took 20 years for somebody to finally speak out about it when it was a well-known secret. It was a well-known secret about Bill Clinton. It was a well-known secret about Joe Biden.
Right.
Everyone knows that Joe Biden is that way.
Right.
Like, many people have talked about it.
Right. Right.
Like, it was not like it was a secret.
Yeah.
And so to say that, oh no, he's fine, like, it's fine, Tara Reade's a freaking liar. Like, no, that's not okay. Like, if you're going to believe women, you have to believe women consistently.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, even if you want to say, take it on a case-by-case basis, look at Biden's case-by-case basis, right? I mean, just what we were saying. What does Biden say? He's like, oh, look at my record, man. Just look at my record. Well, okay.
Like, we have.
Got what, like 9 accusers so far, and you definitely sniffing like multiple children in public. Like, stop. Like, how is this not? And the reason that it's so accepted, right, though, is that it is so common. It is so common, and it's so common in like literally every power dynamics, like every power setting, right? Like, like I remember in college too, like I had a couple of professors that we just all accepted were a little bit, we accepted that they had coerced students into sex for grades or whatever. Like, that's something that was known about them, and we accepted that about them. And we still went to their classes and were friendly with them, and it was sort of normal. It was sort of normal. it sickens me to even think that, because like I knew these people, and I knew the people that were negatively affected by it, and I never really, I didn't know them well enough to really talk to them about it or anything, but like the fact that like it was so normal, it was so normalized. Yeah. Sexuality in a lot of ways too. Like, again, I was in theater, so like you have to undress with each other in the dressing room. Like, it all dressing rooms are co-ed, and like you just get naked in front of each other, like you just do it. But like there's so much sexuality going on that like, borders are always being pushed. And it seems like I can see how in the entertainment world, things like that are so normalized, because you are doing sex scenes with people, you are getting naked with people, and it has to be a professional, normal experience for you, because that's your job. But it's so easy to be taken advantage of also, because it's, I mean, like the power dynamic is like, if you are an actor, then you are sort of like the director's prop. You get to do what the director wants you to do, right? Or the producer, or whoever's making decisions. And, that's something that like, I've been in theater for a long time, because in this weird part of New Jersey that I live in, it's like an hour outside of New York City. Okay. So like, we have several children's programs that like train children for Broadway. Okay. So a lot of people came from this part of Jersey. Fucking the Eisenbergs, Jesse Eisenberg, they came here. What's her name? Who was in The Princess Diaries? What's her name?
Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway. Yeah. She came from here. Like, we have a lot of people that just are from this sort of weird area where they literally train you from fetal position how to tap dance, essentially. Like, it's a very big industry here. So like and from a very young age, again, like that kind of thing is normalized, because you are, getting, undressed with each other, and you are doing adult things on stage with each other. And that kind of thing is just, we don't, it's a part of like the entertainment industry's culture, that it's very easy to push those boundaries, I think. So anyway, that was my 2 cents on that. But I mean, it's not right. I'm not excusing anything, please. There's a reason I got out of it. There's a reason I got out of theater, and I mean, some of it was to do with the fact that I was fat and there was no way that I was going to get parts, and some of it was to do with the fact that I felt like I had to be sexy to get anybody's attention. And, that's, I mean, that was a battle I was having with myself at the time.
Yeah. And that's unfortunately a reality for women. I mean, consider like a lot of our media is like the idea of the sexy wife with the schlubby husband.
Right.
It's like men don't have to be, attractive if they have something else going on, like if they're funny.
Right.
They don't have to be sexy.
But like,
granted,
has to be
we have our candy. We have our eye candy too. I mean, let's be realistic. But it's still a dynamic that women have to be sexy and all these other things. They can't just be the other thing.
Right.
Very rarely do you have an instance where you can be that other thing, even if you are a fat woman like a Melissa McCarthy or an Octavia Spencer, then you still have to be beautiful. Like Ashley Graham, plus size but beautiful. That woman is gorgeous.
Right. I mean, there's a reason I put full drag makeup on right now. This is not my real fucking like, I'm doing this because I intentionally know that I look like, if I don't wear this shit, I look like Madame Drag to a lot of people. And I'm trying to fight that image of myself, right? Absolutely. So I told 3,000,000%.
We're taught to hate ourselves.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, that I never did, but I know that other people do. So that's why I do this, right? Because my everyday job, I look like a hot mess every day. I would go out and give a shit. Like, that's just, I'm lucky that I love myself, considering how fat and dumpy I am.
Oh, don't even.
No, for real. Because like a lot of people who look like me growing up learned to hate themselves. And I just happened to have like the awesomest parents on the planet. And they taught me to love myself really, really, really hard, like probably way too much, because I somehow made it out of that experience not hating myself. So I'm glad to at least say that much. But again, that was part of my weird development coming into adulthood, because I felt like I had to realize that if I wasn't, I had to realize that like all of these feminist realities were still true. And I didn't know that. And looking beautiful was one of those things, going through high school and stuff. I didn't like look like, do my makeup every day and whatever the shit. And like, I wasn't that popular with the boys in high school or whatever. And I just, didn't really think of myself that way, but it didn't prevent me from getting good grades. It didn't prevent me from, like getting good parts in the school plays. And it didn't prevent my parents from loving me. So I didn't really have an issue with it, So, but then I started to realize like, wait a second, like I'm here trying to get a coffee job and they're not going to look at me twice unless I got my boobs out. Oh, this is what reality actually is.
Right. Yeah. And it's crazy. My mom never let me forget that when I was younger. Like especially when I was starting to work, my mom was like, okay, you have to start working out. You have to be on a good diet. You have to do your hair. You have to put makeup on. You have to do all these things because looks matter. Like Megan, looks matter. You have to take this into account. I'll be like, I'm not dealing with all that shit. But it's absolutely the truth that, we're taught that we have to be sexy. We have to be attractive, particularly to men. Like, in order to kind of appeal, we have to appeal to men. And especially growing up, if I liked a boy and he didn't like me, I was very insecure growing up of like, well, why doesn't he like me? What's wrong with me? Like, why don't I have as many friends as they do? Why don't I have a boyfriend like, so and so does? And it was difficult for me growing up, and like, especially I didn't know that I was ace yet, but I grew up, having that kind of mindset of wanting to be accepted. And that took a lot of effect on me when I was growing up, especially in high school when I did eventually get my first boyfriend, because he had as many emotional problems as I did. But it's amazing. It's kind of weird that like broken people tend to attract broken people. It's a weird kind of dynamic.
Right.
Or like they almost imagine like I can fix someone, I'm just as broken as they are. But the reality is that he definitely took advantage of a lot of my vulnerabilities and manipulated the fuck out of me, like gaslit me to no end. And it was a really dysfunctional relationship. And he ended up sexually assaulting me. So
I'm sorry.
It's cool. I am very glad I'm able to talk about it. I never used to be able to talk about it, but I can now. And part of me like doesn't even really fault him to a certain extent, because even though I know it was like him doing that to me, he did that to me. I did not deserve it. I did not deserve to have that happen, but I feel like he was just as much of a part of it as I was. And I know that I had agency in the matter because of what actually occurred. I won't go into the whole detail. But I did have agency, and I could have said no, but at the time I didn't feel like I had the agency to say no.
Yeah.
I felt like, especially when he's saying like, well, you'll do these things for me if you love me. And I don't realize that that's manipulative behavior. And part of the problem that I see too is that we're not taught what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like, especially as young people. We're taught that, especially when we're not taught sex ed in school. very rarely do we get sex ed at home. Like, I know I didn't get sex ed aside from like, you know, you can't go there because girls get pregnant and boys don't. That was the extent of my sexual education growing up. So if you don't get it from school, you don't get it from home, you only get like what you see in the media. So you're not taught the tools. And that's what I was maybe the most mad, is I wasn't given the tools to understand that I was being gaslit, that I was being manipulated, that I was being made to do something I was not ready to do.
Yeah.
And that he was then able to take advantage of that factor. Because, and I don't mean, granted, I don't know his motivation in all of that, and I probably will never know, and I'm comfortable with that now. But basically what it comes down to is that I'm still mad that I did not have those tools. And that's when that to me is one of the most important things that came out of, you know, Yes All Women and Me Too, is realizing, because I didn't realize at that time that I had been sexually assaulted. So I had to endure that trauma during my 20s. And it made it very hard for me to trust people.
Yeah.
So going through like Yes All Women and Me Too was revelatory to me. And it was a healing thing for me, because I was finally able to accept the fact that I had been sexually assaulted. I was able to accept the fact that it was not my fault. And now I can actually talk about it and feel comfortable talking about it, because I know I'm not going to be shamed for what happened to me.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, what Me Too and all these different things have been about, is giving us those tools to finally be able to do it. And my greatest wish is that I could give that to the next generation of girls coming up, because having worked in a middle school, I know they're still not getting those tools.
Yeah.
And that pisses me off, that what happened to me could happen to them. And that will continue to happen to them until we get our shit together.
Yeah. Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's, yeah. I don't even know what to say after that, actually. How can I follow that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important for me to talk about feminism and to talk about these issues. And that's why I ultimately want to start the podcast, because it pisses me off to no end when people misuse feminism for their own personal gain.
Yes.
And for the personal gain of people who have no interest in helping us.
Right.
Like, it's all about I have no interest in helping Hillary Clinton break through a glass ceiling if she has no fucking interest in actually helping us.
Absolutely.
Like, I am not into electing and uplifting our oppressors. Like, someone who is going to defend Harvey Weinstein, someone who's going to defend Bill Clinton. She was instrumental in a lot of that. She was involved. She had agency. She didn't have to do those things. She chose to do those things. She is as much of a problem as either one of them. And the fact that this was all happening around the same time, like, yeah, Trump is evil. You know, Trump is a piece of shit. And I will never support Donald Trump, ever. But the fact that Bill Clinton, or I'm sorry, see, now I'm just mixing them all up around. But the fact that Joe Biden right now, the fact that his DOJ is going to defend Trump against E. Jean Carroll, and Joe Biden is allowing that shit. It just shows you what that culture is. He doesn't give a shit. He is part of it.
Yeah.
He's not going to help us.
No.
And the fact that you have feminists defending that motherfucker.
Yeah.
The fact that there are feminists defending him.
Yeah.
Is sickening to me. And those are the women that I want to take feminism back from. That's why I feel like the podcast I'm getting ready to start is so fucking important, because I want to take that narrative back from those bitches.
Good for you. Yes, I love that. Yes.
I had to get that out. I'm sorry for calling them bitches, but Jesus.
Honestly, I like the word bitch.
I know, so do I.
I feel like it's a word that we should consider reclaiming as well.
Mm-hmm. And I tend to like bitch. I don't know if you read Bitch Media, Bitch Magazine, but they're fantastic. They're all about pop culture.
Absolutely.
But I mean, the idea that, like, for me, I never really gave a shit when people called me a bitch.
Yeah.
Because for me, being called a bitch was saying, like, okay, you're strong, you're capable, you don't take shit from people, you speak up for yourself.
Yes.
That to me is a bitch.
Absolutely.
So I shouldn't even give them the honor of being called a bitch.
Right. Right. I mean, it's interesting because sometimes I feel like people say bitch to mean like, you know, actual dog or slave or something like that. Right. But for the most part these days, bitch means like, you know,
oh, you spoke back to me. You didn't cater to my will.
Right. Exactly. I mean, somebody who resists. Absolutely. I love the word bitch. I'm happy to be one. Happy to be one.
Yeah, happy to be bitches.
Fucking A, happy to be a bitch.
Yeah. I know, this was a great conversation though. I enjoyed it.
Seriously, this was an excellent conversation. We need to have a million more. And
yeah, I'll definitely have you on the podcast sometime soon.
Great, thank you. I'm looking forward to it. And you'll come back on my show and
definitely
let's keep talking about these issues because it's you know, it's important for us to have a voice. Like I'm just tired of other people defining what millennial means. I'm tired of it because I don't feel that it defines me at all or my experiences or any of the experiences of the people I know. So
absolutely.
Yeah, let's keep busting those myths.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. If there's anything I love, it's myth busting.
Yeah. Absolutely. Can we be like femimyth busting? Is that a new show? Can we do that?
Maybe.
Femimyth busting. I don't know. It's a little hard to say. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a little difficult to say.
That's okay.
We'll come up with something.
Well, for now, I'm really excited to hear the Killjoy podcast when that comes out. And I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you. Let's fucking change the world.
Yeah, absolutely.